I used to believe that family meant loyalty, that blood, even half blood, created unbreakable bonds of trust. I thought my stepbrother Derek's constant borrowing and emergency favors were just part of being supportive siblings. But when corporate security called me into a windowless conference room to explain why my employee ID had been used to access restricted financial data at 3 a.m. while I was provably asleep in my apartment, I realized that Derek hadn't just been taking advantage of my kindness. He'd been systematically stealing my professional identity to build his own criminal empire. My name is Victoria Sterling, and this is the story of how one borrowed work badge brought down $1 million corporate fraud scheme. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. It started so innocently that I almost missed it entirely. 3 months ago, I was rushing out of my apartment in downtown Millbrook Heights for an early morning client meeting when Derek called in a panic. Vic, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I have a complete emergency. His voice was breathless, desperate in that way that always made me drop everything to help him. My car broke down right outside the Quantum Financial Building, and I need to grab some documents from my friend who works there. Could I possibly borrow your ID badge just to get through the front lobby? I'll bring it right back, I swear. I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why Derek, a freelance graphic designer who worked primarily with small local businesses, had urgent documents waiting at one of the largest financial corporations in the city. I should have been suspicious that his car had conveniently broken down at the exact building where I worked as a senior data analyst. But Derek had always been the charming one in our blended family. When our parents married 5 years ago, he was the confident 23-year-old who immediately made everyone laugh at family dinners, while I was the awkward 24-year-old still trying to figure out how to navigate suddenly having a stepbrother. Derek had this way of making his problems sound urgent and his requests sound reasonable, even when they really weren't. Please, Vic, you know I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. My friend's waiting for me in the lobby right now, and building security won't let me up without an employee escort or badge. I was already 10 minutes late for my meeting with the Hartwell Industries account, one of the biggest clients our firm had landed all year. I grabbed my backup badge from the kitchen counter, the one I kept for emergencies, and shoved it into his waiting hand. Just bring it back tonight, I called over my shoulder as I rushed to my car. And Derek, don't lose it. These things cost $200 to replace. You're the best sister ever, he called back. And I felt that warm glow of family approval that Derek was so good at creating. I should have noticed that he didn't correct himself. I wasn't his sister. I was his stepsister. The distinction mattered more than I realized at the time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, Derek returned the badge exactly as promised, along with a bouquet of flowers and a box of my favorite chocolates from the expensive bakery downtown. He said, "Thank you so much for saving my life today," giving me one of his characteristic bear hugs. Seriously, Vic, you're amazing. I don't know what I'd do without you. The gesture felt a little excessive for borrowing an ID badge for a few hours, but Derek had always been dramatic about showing gratitude. It was one of the things that made him so popular with our parents. He never forgot to acknowledge when someone helped him. 2 weeks later, he needed it again. I know. I just asked for this recently. He appeared at my apartment door at 7 a.m. with coffee and breakfast sandwiches from my favorite cafe. But my client meeting got moved to the Quantum building, and the guy I know there is out sick. It's just for the morning, and it's a huge potential contract. This could really turn my business around. I was getting ready for a routine day of quarterly reports and database maintenance, nothing that required my badge until after lunch, and Derek was promising to have it back by noon. This isn't going to become a regular thing, is it? I asked, accepting the coffee but giving him my sternest big sister look. Absolutely not. This is a one-time exception. After today, my client situation will be completely sorted out. He was so earnest, so apologetic, that I felt petty for even questioning him. Derek had been struggling to build his graphic design business ever since graduating from college. If letting him borrow my badge for a few hours could help him land a major contract, wasn't that what family was supposed to do for each other? Noon, I said firmly, handing over the badge. And Derek, maybe it's time to look into getting your own visitor access or finding clients who don't require access to major corporate buildings. You're absolutely right, he agreed immediately. After today, I'm definitely going to restructure how I handle these meetings. This was just poor planning on my part. But it wasn't poor planning. It was the beginning of a pattern that would take me weeks to recognize and months to fully understand. Over the next 6 weeks, Derek's emergency requests became more frequent and more elaborate. His car broke down outside the Quantum Financial Building at least once a week. His clients consistently scheduled last-minute meetings in locations that required my employee access. His friend who worked there was perpetually sick, out of town, or dealing with family emergencies that prevented him from providing visitor escorts. Each time, Derek arrived with increasingly thoughtful apologies. Gourmet coffee, expensive pastries, flowers, even a pair of earrings I'd mentioned liking at the mall. Each time, his explanations sounded completely reasonable and his gratitude felt genuine. And each time, I told myself that this was the last favor I'd do, while simultaneously handing over my badge. You know, my coworker Amanda said one Thursday afternoon as we ate lunch in the break room, I keep seeing someone who looks just like you in the elevators lately. Same height, same hair color, but it's weird. They're always wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, even indoors. I paused mid-bite of my sandwich. What do you mean, someone who looks like me? I thought it was you at first, but the timing was always wrong. Like, I'd see this person heading to the restricted floors while you were sitting right here eating lunch. Probably just coincidence. You know how everyone says we all have a doppelganger somewhere. A cold feeling started forming in my stomach, but I pushed it away. Derek always returned my badge exactly when he promised. He couldn't be in the building when I was also in the building. That would be impossible. What restricted floors? I asked casually. 18th and 19th. Executive level and secure data processing. You need special clearance even with an employee badge. I always wondered how they were getting access, but I figured it was just someone I didn't recognize from those departments. The cold feeling in my stomach intensified. My badge, as a senior data analyst, had access to the 18th floor. It was one of the perks of my position, access to the secure research and financial modeling databases that most employees couldn't reach. That evening, I decided to test something. When Derek inevitably called around 6 p.m. asking to borrow my badge for just a quick morning meeting, I told him I needed it for an early project deadline. "Oh," he said, and for just a moment he sounded genuinely thrown off. When do you think you might be free to help me out? This is kind of time-sensitive." "What kind of time-sensitive? I thought you said your client meetings were flexible." "They are, mostly, but this particular client is only in town for a few days. It's a really big opportunity, Vic, like potentially life-changing for my business." Something in his tone set off alarm bells I'd been ignoring for weeks. Derek sounded less like someone asking for help and more like someone who desperately needed access to something specific. "Why don't you just meet your client somewhere else? Like a coffee shop or your apartment? We need to review some digital presentations that require their specialized software. It's complicated. Look, if you can't help me, I understand. I just thought, family, you know?" There it was, the subtle guilt trip that always worked on me. The implication that a good sister would help, that refusing made me selfish or unsupportive. But this time, something stopped me from immediately giving in. "Let me think about it. I'll call you back." I didn't call him back. Instead, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I arrived at work extra early the next morning and checked the building's access logs. Every employee badge was tracked every time it was used. As a senior analyst, I had the clearance to review basic security data for operational purposes.
What I found in those logs made my blood run cold. My badge had been used to access the building at 6:23 a.m., 7:45 a.m., and 9:15 a.m. the previous morning, times when I was provably at home, asleep, and then in a client meeting across town. The access logs showed my badge entering the 18th floor restricted area and remaining there for over 3 hours. Someone had been using my identity to access secured corporate data, and I was just beginning to understand how deep this went. I scrolled back through 6 weeks of access logs, cross-referencing them with my own calendar and text message history with Derek. A pattern emerged that was so systematic, so carefully planned, that it couldn't be coincidence. Every time Derek borrowed my badge, it was used to access restricted areas during times when I had airtight alibis. Someone was using my professional identity not just to enter the building, but to systematically extract data from secured systems. But it got worse. The logs showed that I had been accessing financial databases, client portfolios, and merger analysis documents that weren't even related to my department. Someone with my credentials had been downloading strategic planning files, competitor analysis reports, and preliminary financial models that would be worth millions of dollars to the right buyers. My hands were shaking as I cross-referenced the data access with Derek's borrowing schedule. Every single incident matched perfectly. My stepbrother wasn't just borrowing my badge for client meetings, he was using it to conduct industrial espionage. But even that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was discovering that the data theft had been happening for 6 months longer than I realized. In hidden logs, I found evidence that my badge had been cloned. Someone had created a duplicate that could be used while I was physically present in the building with my original badge. That's how Amanda had seen me in the elevators while I was eating lunch in the break room. My stepbrother hadn't just been borrowing my badge occasionally. He'd been systematically using my identity to steal corporate secrets for months, possibly years. And I'd made it all possible by trusting him. The scope of what I was looking at was staggering. Hundreds of instances of unauthorized access, thousands of documents downloaded, financial data worth millions of dollars extracted from secured systems using my credentials. But the final piece of evidence was what convinced me I wasn't dealing with a misguided stepbrother who'd gotten in over his head. I was dealing with someone who'd planned this from the very beginning.
In the most recent access logs, I found something that made my blood freeze. My badge had been used to access the HR system's employee records. Someone had been researching other employees with high-level security clearances, compiling lists of names, addresses, and access levels. Derek wasn't just stealing data, he was building a network. And I was about to become the fall guy for a corporate espionage operation that was much bigger than just my stepbrother's struggling graphic design business. That's when I realized that every family dinner, every casual conversation about my work, every seemingly innocent question about my colleagues and projects had been Derek gathering intelligence. He'd been studying my job, my access, my schedule, and my personality to figure out exactly how to exploit my trust. I wasn't his beloved stepsister. I was his mark. And I'd been such a perfect mark that I'd practically handed him the keys to commit crimes that could send both of us to federal prison. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, though that cut deep enough to leave permanent scars. The worst part was realizing that I'd been so desperate to be accepted by my new stepfamily that I'd ignored every red flag, every inconsistency, every moment when Derek's requests stopped making sense. I'd wanted so badly to be the helpful, supportive sister that I'd become an accessory to corporate espionage. But as I sat in my cubicle that morning, staring at months of evidence that my stepbrother had been systematically destroying my career and possibly my freedom, something changed inside me. The old Victoria, the one who always said yes, who always helped, who always put family loyalty above her own instincts, was done. The new Victoria was going to figure out exactly what Derek was doing, who he was working with, and how to stop him before this scheme destroyed any more lives. I was going to save myself, my career, and probably several other innocent employees who didn't even know they were being targeted. And then I was going to make sure Derek faced the consequences of what he'd done. Not as his loving stepsister who always forgave him, but as the woman he'd tried to destroy, who turned out to be much stronger than he'd ever imagined. That morning was the last day I would ever be Derek's victim. Tomorrow, I would start becoming his worst nightmare. Because there's one thing Derek had never bothered to learn about me during all his careful planning. I was a data analyst, and I was very, very good at uncovering patterns hidden in complex systems, including patterns of crime, deception, and betrayal. The next few days passed in a haze of disbelief and second-guessing. Every time I looked at the access logs, I told myself there had to be another explanation. Maybe the system was glitched. Maybe someone else had cloned my badge without Derek's knowledge. Maybe I was seeing patterns that weren't really there because I was stressed about work and looking for someone to blame. But deep down, I knew the truth. I just wasn't ready to accept what it meant about my family. I decided to test my theory the only way that seemed fair. I would give Derek one more chance to be honest with me. That Thursday evening, I called him and asked if we could meet for dinner. Nothing confrontational, just siblings catching up. He suggested our usual place, Tony's Italian Kitchen, where our parents had first introduced us 5 years ago. Derek arrived 15 minutes late, which was normal for him, carrying a small wrapped box and wearing the charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. Sorry, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. Traffic was insane, but I brought you something to make up for it. Inside the box was a delicate silver bracelet with tiny charms shaped like computer icons, a keyboard, a mouse, a laptop. It was exactly the kind of thoughtful, personalized gift that Derek excelled at giving. "This is beautiful," I said, genuinely touched despite my suspicions. "What's the occasion?" "Do I need an occasion to appreciate my amazing sister?" He flagged down our waitress and ordered his usual, chicken parmesan and a beer. "I've been thinking lately about how much you've helped me with my business stuff. I don't think I say thank you enough." There was my opening. "Actually, Derek, I wanted to talk to you about that badge borrowing situation." Something flickered across his expression, too quick to identify, but there nonetheless. "Oh, that! Yeah. I know I've been asking a lot lately. My client situation has been more complicated than I expected." "What kind of clients are these exactly? I mean, what do they need that requires access to quantum financials specifically?" Derek took a long drink of his beer, and I watched him carefully. The charming smile stayed in place, but his eyes went flat. "It's mostly tech consulting stuff. Database optimization, security assessments, that kind of thing. Boring technical work, but it pays well." "Security assessments?" "Yeah, you know how these big corporations are always worried about data breaches and cyber attacks. They hire consultants to test their systems, find weaknesses, that sort of thing." The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, but something about the way he delivered it felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced this conversation before. "Derek, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course. What's up?" "When you borrow my badge, what exactly are you doing in the building? Because some of my coworkers have mentioned seeing someone who looks like me in areas I don't usually go to." The change in Derek's demeanor was subtle, but unmistakable. His shoulders tensed, his smile became more forced, and he started fidgeting with his beer bottle. "I don't know what they think they saw, but I'm just meeting with clients in conference rooms. Maybe your coworkers are confusing me with someone else."
But Derek, you're a 6-foot-tall man with dark hair. I'm a 5'6" woman with blonde hair. How could anyone confuse you with me? I don't know, Vic. Maybe they weren't paying attention, or maybe it was someone else entirely. You know how office gossip can get blown out of proportion? He was deflecting, changing the subject, making me feel like I was being paranoid for asking reasonable questions. It was a technique I was starting to recognize, the same one our parents used when they didn't want to address uncomfortable topics directly.
The thing is, I pressed on, I checked the access logs at work, and my badge has been used during times when I wasn't even in the building. That's not possible unless someone else was using it. Derek went very still. When he looked up at me, his expression was completely different, cooler, more calculating. Why were you checking access logs? Because I was confused about what my coworkers were telling me. I wanted to understand what was happening. And what do you think is happening, Victoria? The way he said my full name, formal and distant, sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the warm, grateful stepbrother who brought me coffee and flowers. This was someone else entirely. I think someone has been using my identity to access areas of the building they shouldn't be in. And I think that someone is connected to all the times you've borrowed my badge. Derek went very still. When he looked up at me, his expression was completely different, cooler, more calculating. Why were you checking access logs? Because I was confused about what my coworkers were telling me. I wanted to understand what was happening. And what do you think is happening, Victoria? The thing is, I pressed on, I checked the access logs at work, and my badge has been used during times when I wasn't even in the building. That's not possible unless someone else was using it. Derek went very still. When he looked up at me, his expression was completely different, cooler, more calculating. Why were you checking access logs? Because I was confused about what my coworkers were telling me. I wanted to understand what was happening. And what do you think is happening, Victoria? The way he said my full name, formal and distant, sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the warm, grateful stepbrother who brought me coffee and flowers. This was someone else entirely. I think someone has been using my identity to access areas of the building they shouldn't be in. And I think that someone is connected to all the times you've borrowed my badge. Derek was quiet for a long moment, studying my face, like he was trying to read my thoughts. That's a pretty serious accusation, he said finally. It's not an accusation. It's a question. I'm asking you, as my brother, to help me understand what's going on. And if I told you that you're overthinking this, that you're seeing conspiracies where there aren't any, would you drop it? Are you telling me that? Another long pause. Then Derek smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm telling you that sometimes when we're stressed about work, we start imagining problems that don't exist. Maybe you should talk to someone about this. A therapist, maybe. Or HR, if you're really concerned about security issues. The suggestion hit me like a slap. Derek was trying to make me doubt my own perceptions, to make me think I was having some kind of breakdown instead of uncovering evidence of actual wrongdoing. I'm not imagining anything, Derek. The access logs are real data. Access logs can be wrong. Computer systems glitch all the time. You know that better than anyone. You work with databases every day. But I did work with databases every day, which meant I knew the difference between a system glitch and a pattern of unauthorized access. Derek's attempts to gaslight me were only confirming my worst suspicions. I think we should probably head home, Derek said, signaling for the check. This conversation is getting a little intense, and I don't want us to say things we'll regret. As he paid the bill, another gesture that would have seemed generous under different circumstances, I realized something important. Derek had never actually denied using my badge inappropriately. He deflected, minimized, and tried to make me question my own judgment, but he hadn't once said, "I didn't do what you're suggesting." That night, I decided to try a different approach. If Derek wouldn't be honest with me directly, maybe I could get answers through our parents. The next evening, I drove to their house in Westfield Commons for our weekly family dinner. It was supposed to be a casual tradition, just the four of us sharing a meal and catching up on our lives. But tonight, I had an agenda. "How is Derek's business going?" I asked as my stepfather, Robert, carved the roast chicken. "Oh, Derek's doing wonderfully," my mother replied, beaming with pride. "He's been working so hard, staying up all night sometimes to meet deadlines. Robert and I are so proud of how he's building his career." "What kind of consulting is he doing exactly?" Robert and my mother exchanged a quick glance, the same kind of look I'd been noticing between Derek and them for weeks. "Technical stuff," Robert said vaguely. "Database work, I think. Very specialized. Derek's always been good with computers. Has he mentioned working with Quantum Financial? Another glance. This time I caught the subtle tension that accompanied it. I think he might have mentioned that name, my mother said slowly. Why do you ask? Just curious. That's where I work, and I thought it was an interesting coincidence. Small world, Robert said with forced cheerfulness. Maybe you two could collaborate on something someday. The conversation felt strained, artificial. My parents clearly knew more about Derek's work than they were admitting, and they were being just as evasive as he had been. Actually, I said, deciding to push a little harder, Derek's been borrowing my work badge occasionally to meet with clients in my building. I was wondering if you knew about that. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother set down her fork and looked at me with concern. Sweetheart, are you sure that's appropriate? Lending your employee credentials to someone else? That's what I've been wondering. It seems like it might violate company policy. Well, Robert said carefully, I'm sure Derek wouldn't ask you to do anything that could get you in trouble. He cares about you too much for that. But if I were to get in trouble, hypothetically, would you support me in addressing it? Even if it meant Derek might face consequences too? My parents looked at each other again, and this time, the message between them was crystal clear. Victoria, my mother said gently, Derek is family. We all need to support each other, especially when someone is working so hard to build their future. Maybe instead of looking for problems, you could focus on being grateful that you're in a position to help your brother succeed.
There it was. The choice I was being asked to make. Family loyalty versus my own professional integrity, and possibly my freedom. What if helping Derek succeed means compromising my own career? I'm sure it won't come to that, Robert said quickly. Derek is very responsible. He would never put you at risk. But Derek had already put me at risk. He'd been putting me at risk for months, using my identity to commit crimes that I would be held responsible for if they were discovered. And if it did come to that, I pressed, if I had to choose between protecting Derek and protecting myself? The silence stretched on until it became an answer in itself. Well, my mother said finally, family is the most important thing. We always have to take care of each other, even when it's difficult. I understood then that my parents weren't just enabling Derek's behavior, they were actively supporting it. They knew what he was doing, and they'd decided that protecting him was more important than protecting me. The drive home from that dinner was the longest 30 minutes of my life. I kept replaying the conversation, looking for some other interpretation, some way to convince myself that my family wasn't choosing Derek over me. But there was no other interpretation. My stepbrother had been systematically stealing my professional identity to commit corporate espionage, and my parents were helping him do it by encouraging me to stay quiet and compliant. I was completely alone in this. When I got home, I found Derek sitting on my apartment building's front steps, looking uncharacteristically serious. "We need to talk," he said. I let him follow me upstairs, partly because I was curious about what he wanted to say, and partly because I was still hoping for some explanation that would make this all make sense. "Look, Vic," he said as soon as my apartment door closed behind us. "I know you've been asking questions, and I understand why you're concerned. But you need to understand something important. You're already part of this." The words hit me like ice water. "What do you mean I'm already part of this?" "I mean that your badge has been used to access classified information for months. Your digital fingerprints are all over files you were never supposed to see. If this comes out, you're not going to look like an innocent victim. You're going to look like a willing participant." Derek's voice was calm, matter of fact, like he was explaining a simple business transaction. "Even if you convince someone that you didn't know what was happening, your career will be over. No company will ever trust you with sensitive data again. And that's the best case scenario." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining reality to you.
We're in this together now, whether you want to be or not. The smart thing, the family thing, is to keep quiet and let me handle the situation. Handle it how? By making sure it never comes to light. I have everything under control, Vic. All you have to do is stop asking questions and keep lending me your badge when I need it. In a few months, this will all be over and we can both move on with our lives. I stared at my stepbrother, this person I'd trusted, supported, and tried to love as family, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Maybe I always had been. And if I don't agree to that? Derek's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Then you'll find out how convincing the evidence against you really is. And trust me, Vic, it's very, very convincing. After Derek left, I sat in my apartment for hours, trying to process what had just happened. My stepbrother hadn't just been using my identity to commit crimes, he'd been carefully documenting everything to make it look like I was a willing participant. I was being framed by my own family for crimes I didn't even know were happening until this week. That night, I realized something that changed everything. My family wasn't going to help me. They weren't going to choose me over Derek, weren't going to support me in doing the right thing, and weren't going to protect me from the consequences of his actions. If I wanted to save myself, I was going to have to do it alone. If I wanted justice, I was going to have to fight for it without backup. And if I wanted to stop Derek from destroying other innocent people's lives, I was going to have to become someone I'd never been before, someone willing to take on her own family. The old Victoria, the one who always tried to keep the peace, who always gave everyone the benefit of the doubt, who always put family harmony above her own instincts, was officially gone. The new Victoria was going to save herself. And then she was going to make sure Derek faced the consequences of every choice he'd made. Not as his loving stepsister who'd been manipulated into helping him, but as the data analyst who was about to turn all her skills toward exposing the truth about what he'd really been doing. Family loyalty worked both ways, and Derek had just taught me that he'd never considered me family at all. Now, it was time to return the favor.
Okay, I said meekly, whatever you think is best. But I wasn't being meek. I was being strategic. That afternoon, I submitted a request for 2 weeks of vacation time, citing personal family matters that require immediate attention. My supervisor approved it without question. I'd been with Quantum Financial for 3 years and had barely used any of my accumulated leave. What my supervisor didn't know was that I planned to spend those 2 weeks conducting the most thorough investigation of my life. The first thing I did was something Derek would never expect. I studied him. For 3 years, I'd lived in the same city as my stepbrother, shared family dinners with him every week, and listened to countless stories about his life and work, but I'd never actually verified any of it. I started with his apartment. Derek lived in Harborview Towers, a luxury high-rise in the downtown district that rented units for $3,000 a month. I'd always assumed he could afford it because his graphic design business was more successful than he let on, or because our parents were helping with expenses. But when I researched the building's rental requirements, I discovered that Derek's unit required proof of income of at least $120,000 annually. I'd seen Derek's tax returns during a family financial planning discussion the previous year. He'd reported barely $35,000 in business income. So where was the extra money coming from? I spent an entire day conducting surveillance from a coffee shop across the street from his building. What I observed shattered any remaining illusions about Derek's struggling business. Between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., Derek received 7 visitors, not clients coming for consultations, but people who stayed for exactly 15 minutes each, carrying briefcases and manila envelopes. The meetings were precise, scheduled, and clearly transactional. More telling was Derek's behavior during these meetings.
Through the building's floor-to-ceiling lobby windows, I could see him greeting each visitor with professional handshakes, not the casual friendliness he used with actual friends or family. These were business transactions. But the most revealing moment came at 3:30 p.m. when a woman in an expensive business suit arrived carrying a laptop bag. I recognized her immediately from Quantum Financial's annual reports. Janet Morrison, Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. Janet Morrison had no legitimate reason to visit Derek personally. Her department handled merger acquisitions and competitive analysis, information worth millions to the right buyers. After she left Derek's building, I followed her back to Quantum Financial and watched her badge into the executive floors. Within an hour, Derek texted me asking to borrow my badge again for an urgent client meeting the next morning. The timing wasn't coincidental. Derek wasn't just stealing data from Quantum Financial, he was selling it to employees within the company who were using it for insider trading and competitive advantage. This was so much bigger than I had imagined. That night, I started building what I privately called Project Exposure, a comprehensive investigation using every data analysis skill I'd learned in my professional career. I began by accessing public business registration databases. Derek's graphic design business, Sterling Creative Solutions, had been registered 3 years ago, but the financial filings told an interesting story. The business reported minimal income, but had received several large consulting fees from companies I'd never heard of. When I traced those companies through business registration records, I discovered they were shell corporations with no physical addresses and no legitimate business operations. They existed solely to move money around in ways that would be difficult to trace. Derek wasn't just committing corporate espionage, he was running a sophisticated money laundering operation. But I needed more than public records to understand the full scope of what he was doing. I needed access to the systems at Quantum Financial that Derek had been infiltrating using my credentials. This is where my legitimate access as a senior data analyst became invaluable. Over the next 3 days, I systematically reviewed every database and system that my badge could access. I wasn't looking for the information Derek had been stealing. I was looking for the digital footprints he'd left behind while stealing it. What I found was a masterclass in systematic data theft. Derek hadn't been randomly grabbing files. He'd been conducting targeted extraction of specific types of information. Quarterly earnings reports before they were released publicly, merger negotiation details, competitive strategy documents, and client portfolio analyses. Each piece of stolen information represented a different revenue stream. Earnings reports could be sold to day traders for stock manipulation. Merger details were valuable to competing companies or corporate raiders. Strategy documents could be sold to competitors to give them decisive advantages in market positioning. But the most disturbing discovery was in the HR database. Derek had been systematically researching other employees with high-level security clearances. He'd compiled detailed profiles including their personal information, family situation, financial status, and psychological assessments from company wellness programs. He was building a recruitment database. Derek wasn't my only victim. He was his proof of concept. The profiles he'd compiled showed a pattern. Employees with financial stress, family obligations, or personal vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Young professionals living beyond their means. Single parents struggling with childcare costs. Employees with elderly parents requiring expensive medical care. Derek had identified at least 12 other potential targets within Quantum Financial alone. But it got worse. Hidden in a secure folder that required my senior analyst credentials to access, I found correspondence between Derek and contacts at other major corporations throughout the city. He wasn't just operating within Quantum Financial, he was building a network that spanned the entire business district. The emails were carefully coded, but the pattern was clear. Derek was offering consulting services to help other entrepreneurs develop access solutions for competitive research at their respective companies. He was franchising his operation, teaching other people how to recruit family members and romantic partners to provide access to corporate systems, how to identify vulnerable employees, how to systematically extract valuable data without triggering security protocols.
The scope was staggering. Based on the correspondence I could access, Derek's network was operating in at least 8 major corporations, with dozens of recruited insiders providing access to sensitive information. And all of it had started with me. My trusting, helpful nature had been the foundation for a criminal enterprise that was undermining corporate security throughout the entire city. But understanding the scope of Derek's operation also revealed its vulnerabilities. Every crime leaves traces. Every transaction creates records. Every communication can be documented and analyzed. And I was very, very good at finding patterns in complex systems. I spent the next week building the most comprehensive evidence file of my career. Bank records showing suspicious transactions, communication logs revealing the network of co-conspirators, access records proving data theft spanning multiple companies and potentially affecting thousands of employees and millions of dollars in corporate assets. But I needed more than just data. I needed proof that would be actionable for law enforcement. That's when I decided to do something that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I was going to infiltrate Derek's operation from the inside. Using techniques I learned from cybersecurity training courses, I created a fake email account that appeared to be from a competitor corporation. I crafted a message that would appeal to Derek's greed and ego, a request for consultation on developing competitive intelligence capabilities with a budget of $50,000 for the right advisor. Derek responded within 6 hours. Over the next 4 days, I conducted an elaborate social engineering operation against my own stepbrother. Through encrypted email exchanges and carefully scripted phone calls using voice-changing software, I convinced Derek that I represented Pinnacle Industries, a manufacturing company interested in gaining advantages over their competitors through enhanced information access. Derek was eager to help. He explained his entire operation in detail, believing he was educating a potential client. He outlined his recruitment techniques, his data extraction methods, his money laundering strategies, and his network of corporate contacts. He even bragged about his perfect inside source at Quantum Financial, a naive family member who'd been providing access for months without understanding what she was really supporting. Every word of our conversations was recorded. But the most valuable intelligence came when Derek offered to provide a demonstration of his capabilities. He suggested that I could verify his effectiveness by reviewing samples of the information he'd already extracted from various targets. To prove his legitimacy, Derek sent me copies of documents that had been stolen from 3 different corporations, along with details about how and when they'd been obtained. He just provided me with evidence of multiple federal crimes. But I still needed one more piece. Proof that could directly link Derek to the crimes in a way that would convince prosecutors to take action immediately. That's when I decided to do something that terrified and exhilarated me in equal measure. I was going to set a trap. Using my fake Pinnacle Industries identity, I arranged to meet with Derek in person to finalize our business relationship. I suggested Harborview Tower's conference room, which I knew had security cameras that would record our entire interaction. I told Derek I wanted to see him extract data from Quantum Financial in real time to verify his capabilities before committing to a long-term partnership. Derek was so confident in his control over me that he agreed immediately. "I can have new intelligence for you within hours," he promised. "My source is completely reliable and has no idea she's supporting competitive research. It's the perfect setup." The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday at 2 p.m. But I wouldn't be attending as his potential client. I'd be attending as Victoria Sterling, Senior Data Analyst at Quantum Financial, with a full briefing prepared for corporate security and federal law enforcement. Over the weekend, I compiled everything I'd discovered into a comprehensive report that read like a thriller novel, except every detail was documented with evidence that would hold up in court. Derek's criminal network, the money laundering operation, the systematic recruitment of corporate insiders, the evidence of data theft spanning multiple companies and potentially affecting thousands of employees and millions of dollars in corporate assets. I'd also prepared detailed profiles of Derek's other targets within Quantum Financial, allowing security to protect them before they could be exploited.
But the most important document I prepared was a timeline showing that I'd been an unwitting victim, not a willing participant. My cooperation with Derek had ended the moment I discovered his true activities, and every subsequent action I had taken had been designed to gather evidence for law enforcement. I wasn't just going to save myself from Derek's frame job. I was going to save everyone else he'd targeted or planned to target. On Sunday night, I did something I'd never done before. I called the FBI directly. "This is Special Agent Rachel Chen." Wait, no. I had to avoid that name. "This is Special Agent Rachel Kim," I corrected in my mind. "I need to report a multi-corporation espionage and money laundering operation, and I have comprehensive evidence that I believe you'll find very interesting." Within 2 hours, I was sitting in a conference room at the FBI field office, walking 3 agents through the most complex criminal case any of us had ever seen. "Miss Sterling," Agent Kim said when I finished my presentation, "what you've uncovered here is extraordinary. This represents one of the most sophisticated corporate espionage networks we've encountered in this region." "What happens next?" I asked. "Next, we coordinate with corporate security at Quantum Financial and the other affected companies. We place surveillance on your stepbrother and his known associates. And tomorrow, when he meets with his supposed new client, he's going to find himself under arrest for federal crimes that could send him to prison for decades." "And what about me? Derek has evidence that makes it look like I was a willing participant." Agent Kim smiled. "Miss Sterling, the evidence you've provided makes it very clear that you were a victim who became a whistleblower. Your cooperation with our investigation will be noted in all proceedings. You're not in trouble. You're a hero."
That night, I sat in my apartment for the last time as Derek's victim. Tomorrow, I would attend his meeting as the architect of his downfall, the woman who'd turned her data analysis skills into the tools of justice, the sister who'd refused to let family loyalty enable criminal behavior, and the professional who'd saved not just herself, but dozens of other innocent people from being exploited by someone they trusted. Derek had taught me that family could be a weapon used against me. Tomorrow, I was going to teach him that family loyalty worked both ways, and I'd never been loyal to criminals, even when they shared my DNA. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystal clear sky that felt symbolic of what was about to happen. I woke up at 5 a.m., not because I'd set an alarm, but because my body was humming with anticipation. Today was the day Derek would finally face the consequences of every choice he'd made. The FBI had been thorough in their preparation. Agent Kim had walked me through the entire plan 3 times, ensuring I understood my role and the safety protocols in place. The conference room at Harborview Towers had been prepared with surveillance equipment so sophisticated that it could capture conversations from multiple angles and record even whispered discussions. More importantly, teams were already in position at Quantum Financial and the 7 other corporations Derek's network had infiltrated. When Derek was arrested, simultaneous raids would take down his entire operation. "Are you ready for this?" Agent Kim asked as I arrived at the FBI command post they'd established in an office building across from Harborview Towers. "I've been ready for weeks," I said, and realized I meant it. The nervous, self-doubting woman who'd first discovered those access logs was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that sometimes the only way to protect yourself was to fight back with everything you had. At 1:45 p.m., I walked into Harborview Towers wearing the same professional outfit I'd worn to work every day for 3 years. Navy blazer, white blouse, and the ID badge that started this entire nightmare. But today, the badge represented something different. Today, it was a symbol of the legitimate authority Derek had tried to steal from me. The building security team had been briefed by the FBI and knew to allow me access to the conference room despite not having a visitor appointment. I settled into a chair at the far end of the table, positioning myself where Derek would see me immediately when he entered. At exactly 2 p.m., Derek walked through the conference room door carrying a laptop bag and wearing the confident smile that had charmed our parents and fooled me for months. He was expecting to meet with his potential new client from Pinnacle Industries, ready to demonstrate his data theft capabilities to close a $50,000 deal.
Instead, he saw me. The transformation in his expression was immediate and devastating. Confidence melted into confusion, then recognition, then a cold fury that I'd never seen from him before. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Hello, Derek. I thought it was time we had an honest conversation." He glanced around the room, and I could see him calculating, trying to understand what was happening. Where's the client? The Pinnacle Industries meeting? There is no Pinnacle Industries client. There never was. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stared at me like he was seeing me for the first time, and in a way he was. The compliant, trusting stepsister he'd manipulated for months was gone. In her place was someone who'd outplayed him at his own game. "You," he said slowly, disbelief coloring his voice. "You were the client. You've been playing me. The same way you've been playing me for months. The same way you've been playing our parents, your other victims, and every person who trusted you." Derek's laptop bag hit the table with a sharp thud. "Do you have any idea what you've done? What this could cost both of us?" "I know exactly what I've done. I've documented every crime you've committed, traced every dollar you've stolen, and identified every person you've recruited into your network." "You stupid—" He caught himself, but the mask of charm was completely gone now. "You have no idea how deep this goes. You think you can just expose this and walk away? You're already implicated in everything. Your badge, your access, your digital fingerprints are all evidence of the crimes you committed using my identity. Crimes that I've spent weeks documenting with enough detail to convict you and everyone you've been working with." Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Convict me? Vic, you're living in a fantasy. No one's going to believe that poor little Victoria was an innocent victim in all this. You gave me your badge dozens of times. You never reported any suspicious activity. You're going down with me." "Actually," I said, reaching into my briefcase and pulling out a thick folder. I laid out photographs from my surveillance of his building, showing his meetings with Janet Morrison and his other co-conspirators, bank records proving the money laundering through shell corporations, copies of the stolen documents he'd sent to his fake Pinnacle Industries client, transcripts of our recorded conversations where he detailed his entire operation. Derek's face went pale as he recognized each piece of evidence. "Where did you get all this?" "I'm a data analyst, Derek. I'm very good at finding patterns and building comprehensive pictures from scattered information. I'm especially good at it when someone has been systematically lying to me for months. This is—" Derek fumbled through the documents, his confidence evaporating with each page. "This isn't possible. You couldn't have— Couldn't have what? Figured out that you were using me? Discovered your network of corporate espionage? Traced your money laundering operation? Or maybe you thought I couldn't outsmart you because I was just your naive little stepsister."
Derek looked up from the evidence with something approaching respect, mixed with genuine fear. "How long have you known?" "I started suspecting something was wrong 3 weeks ago. I've known the full scope of your operation for 1 week. And I've been building the case against you for the past 5 days." "A case against me?" Derek's voice cracked slightly. "Vic, what exactly do you think you're doing here?" "I'm doing what you taught me to do. I'm protecting myself from someone who was using family connections to destroy my life." That's when Derek finally understood. His eyes widened as the full implications hit him. "You're not here to confront me," he said slowly. "You're here to—" The conference room door opened, and Agent Kim walked in, flanked by 2 other federal agents. Derek spun around, saw the badges and handcuffs, and immediately turned back to me with an expression of pure betrayal. "You called the FBI?" "Derek Morrison," Agent Kim announced formally. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, money laundering, identity theft, and violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act."
As the agents moved to handcuff Derek, he kept staring at me like he couldn't comprehend what was happening. "You destroyed your own family," he said, his voice breaking. "Do you understand what you've done? Mom and Dad will never forgive you for this." "They might not," I said calmly, as Agent Kim read Derek's his rights. "But I'll sleep better knowing I stopped you from destroying any more innocent people's lives." "I gave you everything," Derek shouted, as the agents led him toward the door. "I treated you like family. I protected you. You used me. I corrected. You manipulated me. You threatened me. And you tried to frame me for your crimes. That's not family, Derek. That's not even human." The last thing Derek said before the conference room door closed behind him was barely audible, but I heard every word. "You have no idea what you've unleashed." He was wrong. I knew exactly what I'd unleashed. Justice. While Derek was being processed at the federal building, coordinated raids were taking place across the city. Janet Morrison was arrested in her Quantum Financial office, along with 2 other executives who'd been purchasing stolen information. Shell Corporation bank accounts were frozen. Derek's co-conspirators at 7 other major corporations were taken into custody. The evidence I'd provided led to the largest corporate espionage bust in the city's history. But the day's revelations weren't over. Agent Kim called me at 6 p.m. with news that sent shockwaves through everything I thought I understood about my family. "Victoria, we've been analyzing Derek's financial records and communication logs. There's something you need to know about your parents." My heart sank. They knew, didn't they? "It's worse than that. Your stepfather, Robert, has been receiving monthly payments from one of Derek's shell corporations for the past 2 years, $5,000 a month, listed as consulting fees for a company that doesn't exist." The room started spinning. My parents were being paid? Your mother's business, Patricia's Interior Design Solutions, has also received several large payments disguised as client fees. Based on the amounts and timing, it appears your parents weren't just enabling Derek's operation, they were being compensated for their participation. I sat down heavily in my apartment's living room, trying to process this final betrayal. My parents hadn't just chosen Derek over me out of misguided family loyalty. They'd chosen him because he was paying them. "How much?" I asked quietly. "Combined, approximately $180,000 over 2 years. I thought about my mother's encouraging me to be grateful for the opportunity to help Derek succeed, my stepfather's insistence that family takes care of each other, their dismissal of my concerns, and their pressure to keep quiet and supportive. They hadn't been protecting Derek out of love. They'd been protecting their income stream." "Agent Kim," I said, "what happens to them?" "They'll be arrested tomorrow morning on charges of conspiracy and money laundering. The evidence is quite clear. They knew what Derek was doing and accepted payment to help maintain his access to your credentials." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment thinking about the family I thought I had versus the criminal enterprise I'd actually been living with. Every family dinner, every conversation about my work, every piece of advice they'd given me about being supportive and trusting, it all had been designed to keep me compliant and useful to their operation. I'd never actually had a family at all. I'd been raised by people who saw me as an asset to be exploited. But as devastating as that realization was, it was also liberating. I didn't owe these people anything. I didn't need to feel guilty about exposing their crimes. I didn't need to mourn the loss of relationships that had never been real in the first place. The next morning, I watched the news coverage of my parents' arrests from my office at Quantum Financial. The headline read, "Local business owners arrested in million-dollar corporate espionage scheme." My supervisor, Jennifer Walsh, knocked on my office door around 10 a.m. "Victoria, could we talk privately?" I followed her to her office, expecting some kind of disciplinary action or at least a serious conversation about the security breach that happened through my credentials. Instead, Jennifer smiled and gestured for me to sit down. I want you to know that corporate security has completed the investigation of the data breaches, and your role in exposing this network has been exemplary. You've potentially saved this company millions of dollars and protected dozens of employees from being exploited. I just did what I thought was right, I said, which is exactly why I'm authorized to offer you a promotion. We're creating a new position, Director of Internal Security Analysis, that would involve working directly with our cybersecurity team to identify potential threats and vulnerabilities. The salary increase would be substantial, and you'd be working on some of the most important projects the company handles. I stared at Jennifer, hardly believing what I was hearing. You're promoting me? Victoria, what you uncovered here wasn't just a security breach. It was a systematic attack on corporate integrity that could have destroyed this company.
Multiple companies. Your analytical skills, attention to detail, and courage in coming forward have made you invaluable to this organization. 6 months later, Derek was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. My parents received 8 years each. Janet Morrison and the other corporate conspirators received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. The trial was a media sensation. The press called it the Family Fraud Network, and Derek became the face of a new kind of white-collar crime that used emotional manipulation and family relationships to gain access to corporate secrets. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through my investigation and explaining how I'd uncovered the network. The prosecutors called me a hero. Derek's defense attorney tried to paint me as a willing participant who'd turned against her family to save herself. The jury didn't buy it. When the verdicts were read, Derek looked across the courtroom at me one last time. There was no anger in his expression anymore, just a kind of hollow resignation. He'd finally understood that the person he'd tried to manipulate and control had become someone much stronger than he'd ever imagined. Today, I work as Director of Internal Security Analysis for Quantum Financial, leading a team that investigates potential threats and protects employees from the kind of exploitation I experienced. We've identified and stopped 12 attempted infiltration schemes in the past 6 months, saving the company an estimated $50 million in potential losses. I've also started a nonprofit organization called Family First Security that educates people about how to recognize when family members or romantic partners might be exploiting their professional access. We've helped over 200 people identify and report suspicious requests for credentials or information. Last week, I received a letter from Derek in federal prison. He apologized for what he'd done and said he was glad I'd found the strength to stop him before he hurt more people. He also said he finally understood that I'd been more family to him than he'd ever been to me, because real family protects each other from harm, even when it's difficult. I didn't write back. Some bridges, once burned, should stay that way. Mrs. Brightwater. No, wait, that was the previous story. Amanda, my coworker who first noticed someone who looked like me in the elevators, has become one of my closest friends. She often jokes that she helped solve the crime of the century by making a casual observation over lunch. You know what's amazing about all this? She said during our coffee break last week. Derek thought he was so smart, using family connections to manipulate you, but he never considered that those same family connections would make you fight harder to protect innocent people. She's right. Derek taught me that family could be a weapon used against you, but he also taught me that sometimes the people who share your blood aren't really family at all. Real family, the kind worth protecting, are the people who support your growth, respect your boundaries, and celebrate your success without expecting anything in return. Real family doesn't ask you to compromise your integrity for their convenience. And real family definitely doesn't frame you for federal crimes.
The broken trust Derek created in my life was like that shattered window in my previous story. It seemed devastating at first, but it turned out to be the crack that let the light in. The light that showed me who I really was when I stopped trying to be who other people wanted me to be. The light that revealed my own strength, intelligence, and capability. And the light that illuminated a path toward a life where I was valued for my skills, respected for my integrity, and appreciated for my contributions. Derek had tried to steal my identity to build his criminal empire. Instead, he'd helped me discover who I really was. And the person I really was turned out to be someone much more powerful than he'd ever imagined. Someone who could take down entire criminal networks. Someone who could turn her greatest vulnerability into her greatest strength. Someone who understood that the best revenge against people who try to use you is becoming someone they can never use again. Derek had taught me that blood doesn't make family. I'd taught him that family loyalty only applies to people who actually treat you like family. And in the end, that lesson had cost him everything while setting me free.